It is my great pleasure to introduce Diane Greene today, our first speaker for the series. Diane is originally from the East Coast. And she came to California, to Berkeley, as a graduate student, and she earned her master's in computer science in 1988. 10 years after earning that degree, she co-founded VMware with a great team of collaborators, and together they built an incredibly successful company. Diane served as VMware's president and CEO for a decade, leaving the company in 2008. Currently, she serves on a number of high-profile corporate and nonprofit boards, including Google and Intuit, and of course, the most important of those, the College of Engineering Advisory Board. You know, you have to have your priorities. So she's a very close friend of Berkeley Engineering. We deeply appreciate her taking the time to be here today and speak with all of us. So she will begin her remarks in a moment. At the end, there will be time for Q&A. And we'll have microphones, and at that time, you know, let her know also who you are and your major and things like that when you ask a question. And with that, please give a warm welcome to Diane Greene.
Hi. I'm actually going to try and use my computer. So it's great and an honor to be part of this distinguished lecture series. And back at Cal, I learned to say "Go Bears," I have to say I talk to students all the time. I actually have another startup, and we do a lot of interviewing and just friends, kids, and when I meet college kids, you know, and work with college kids today, you're so many light years ahead of where I was when I was in college that, you know, sometimes I feel funny telling my story because I'm not sure, you know, I grew up without the internet, and I think when you grow up with the internet, your brain is bigger. And but hopefully there'll be some wisdom in what all I have to tell you. So basically, I decided I would sort of make the theme of this talk about making choices proactively, you know, deciding what it is you want to do and choosing it, and then, you know, navigating your way there to achieve what it is you're trying to achieve, which obviously you'll course correct as any ship does as it navigates along the way. And I'm going to pepper it with anecdotes from sort of the last 50 years. And the examples are going to come from windsurfing, studying mechanical engineering, naval architecture, all things both I have degrees in addition to computer science from University of Vermont and MIT and then Cal. And also working at big companies, working at startups, and then I'll spend a bit of time on building VMware and a little bit about what, you know, what it's like to build a company now, you know, 8 years after I left VMware when the world just completely changed in the intervening 8 years. So, and then I hope to get a lot of questions. So I'll try not to talk too long because the questions are by far the most fun. And so the point is, as Cal students, you guys have tons of options. You know, it's rare that an option is just exactly what you want to do. You get lots of advice from your friends, your elders, your parents, and so on. And you want to make sure that you're heading towards what it is you want to do. And one thing people have a problem with when you have a lot of options, I think you probably have more options than I had, so my life was maybe simpler, is you don't want to close, you know, by making a choice, you don't want to close up, well, if I choose that, will I be able to do this later? So you're trying to kind of globally optimize to keep all your options open. Well, you got to choose something. And then, there's something you want to do, but you don't really feel qualified to do it, or you maybe don't feel prepared to do it, so I'm not sure if I should do that, or well, this is, what I really want to do is be a chef, and yet I just got a PhD in computer science. Is that okay to do? Well, it probably is, but, so am I really taking advantage of who I've become in my choice? So these are all the complications, when you go to make a choice. If you make an opportunistic choice because you choose the most prestigious option you had or something like that, but you're not excited about it, you might not end up doing that well in it or being that happy. If you make a really safe choice, you might not learn much, and I suspect people are happiest when they're learning. And if you make your choice, your parents, your professor, might think you're being foolish. And so, it's not trivial, but you can do it. And I say, it's sort of trite, but what do you find yourself thinking about? When you're thinking about the possibilities in the world and what could happen in the world and what could be done to make the world a little different and better that you're thinking about that's really keeps coming back in your head. Well, that's probably, where you should go choose something to do. You'll be engaged, you'll learn the most and find it rewarding. So I kind of framed it in 3 areas of how you go about exploring how you do these things. And one is how you go about listening to other people's feedback and advice, and put a very, very heavy filter on it because you're the expert. But listen, how to make sure you're thinking independently from first principles, maybe using your experience, other people's experience, but think independently. And then navigating there, keeping going, being tenacious, being resilient, and finding your way there. I grew up sailing, and it really, when you're racing, I race sailboats quite a bit, and the way to get around the course the fastest just changes all the time. You thought the wind was doing a certain thing, but the wind patterns changed, and you've got to adjust your course, or you didn't predict that one of your competitors was as good as they were, and you got to figure out how to cover them and get them behind you. And so, you're constantly in real time, you have a plan, and you're changing it, and you've got to be tenacious about it. So first, it is good, to learn as much as you can and seek other people's advice and learn from it. But I have to say, and I'll give the example when we were founding VMware. So VMware is a layer of software that sits between the hardware and the operating system, and it sort of fools the operating system to thinking it's running on the hardware, but really you can run multiple operating systems on the same machine. You can run multiple virtual machines, they're called. And so, we had this idea that this would be incredibly useful to the world. It's something IBM had done a long time ago for similar reasons, but the nature of hardware and software was so different. The value proposition wasn't nearly what it could be. Like its time had come, and the value proposition was immense. And we saw it, we were committed to it, we just saw the whole thing. It was just completely, when I hired an office manager when we were 10 people, I said, she had a PhD in microbiology, but she wasn't working, and she made an unbelievable office manager. But when she came, I was actually nursing my second baby, and I said, well, this software is going to run on every machine in the world someday. And she's like, I got to work for this person, And that's what she tells me. We're very good friends still. But anyhow, it wasn't so obvious to the rest of the world. So I went out, and I'm trying to talk to people I really respected. There was an entrepreneur in the Valley that had founded 3 successful hardware companies. I just thought the world of him. I got him to have dinner with me and told him about what we were going to do. And he's like, why would you do that? And then I went out of desperation. Of course, he was very wealthy. Out of desperation, I said, well, you know, if you, you know, you don't have to have as many machines because you can run multiple different, you know, you could run all Microsoft and different versions of Microsoft, and they could all be on the same machine. You wouldn't have to have multiple machines, and it would take up less space in your house. And he said, well, I have a gigantic house, and I have a lot of empty rooms. And so then I said, okay, well, you know, we're going to try and do this anyhow, but I certainly didn't ask him for funding. And so, and then, you know, we talked to the VCs, and they kept trying to find the killer app, and we said, well, this thing is horizontal. It's for everything. And then, no, you can't go to market without it. You got to have the killer app. I think you should use this for, one person thought, for fault tolerance, for hardware fault tolerance. And we're like, that's way down the road. And, you know, we'll be old and dead before we get there. And not that we'll be old and dead, we'll be out of business before we get there, is what we thought. And then another VC said, well, you know, it was just at the time when people were starting to host things. This was in 1998. We started the company. I know because it's when my daughter was born. And the VCs, this other VC, people were just starting to host. The cloud had not even remotely happened, but a few people were trying to host software. And he said, well, this is your secret weapon. You can get into, he was very farsighted. He knew that hosting was going to become a big deal. It took another 10 years, really, to happen. But, and this can be the secret weapon, you know, your unfair advantage for hosting with these virtual machines. And that was true, too. It was, I mean, today that's how people do the cloud. They do it with virtual machines and containers. But he was just 10 years too early, and had we tried to do that, we would have been 10 years too early, and you can't build a company with technology, with a solution that the world's going to take 10 years to adopt because you run out of money. And so, you know, we ignored these VCs. We said, well, we'll do, and we finally figured out that what we should do was go to people that were rich, that were also really good computer scientists that understood what we were doing. And so we called up Andy Bechtolsheim and John Hennessy and a few other people that we knew that had built and sold companies, but also were, you know, PhD level computer scientists that really, and it took about 10 minutes, and they said, yeah, I'm in. They really got it. And so that was how we funded the company. But you know, but the experts, the VCs, we had to totally tune out. And we knew that we understood it better than them. And I have seen a lot of young people, when they start a company, they know that they don't have experience. And so they they'll go get about 5 or 6 world experts, kind of. It's amazing who they can get to advise them, you know, all these very famous, prominent people. Because that's sort of what Steve Jobs did and all these other people. So they do it, and they're exceptional kids, very smart and talented. But when I talk to them, they're like trying to get the amalgamation of what all these 6 different people said, and all the things they said conflict with each other, and they're not thinking for themselves, and they don't, you know, sometimes, some of them execute spectacularly, but sometimes people don't execute well because they're not stopping and thinking for themselves. They're just taking too many things that advisors say. So it's just very important to always think from first principles. And then when someone gives you advice that's different from what you think, push them to show you why your assumptions are wrong. And if they can't do that, you have to tune it out. We took the software up with Microsoft. We were a little worried about launching our software because they thought, you know, we were going to run their Windows was pretty big back then, though it still is, but it was way bigger. And ran on, the Mac was hardly there, and it was also on servers, and Linux hadn't really totally happened yet. And we knew Microsoft would maybe get upset about us, so and they had been trying to find out what we were doing. They knew some of the people at the company, and so we called up the head of research, Rick Rash, and we said, why don't we come up, we're about to launch, why don't we come up and tell you what we're doing so you're not surprised by it. When you're building a company, people you want to partner with and work with, don't ever surprise them, and they start to trust you a little bit. Microsoft never trusted us, but anyhow, we tried. But what they said, wow, this is really awesome technology. You know what you should use this for is for Microsoft device driver developers, for them to test their devices. I think it could be pretty good for that. And we're like, wow, that's like maybe we'll sell $3 million worth of product a year. And, it's not a market. And so we kind of tuned that out, and they kind of laughed at us. Rick Rashid did ask for a copy. He said he'd like to play around with it. So the point is, if you really know what you're doing, just keep going and keep proving yourself. Completely shifting gears, another example, my husband, who's a professor of computer science at Stanford, got his PhD here at Cal, and I remember when we met here, and when he was graduating, he's not much of a writer. He doesn't really like to write, and the professors were kind of telling him, you really need to publish a lot if you want to get a job. And he just was unable to do it, so he did what he could do. He published one paper, but it got him a job offer from Stanford and MIT and everywhere else. So it's just, the point is, just be yourself and work really hard and be excellent, and don't worry if people's advice is a little bit different from what works for you. Another example I could give about that is, because I sort of followed, Google was founded about the same time VMware was, and I've known Larry and Sergey for a long time. And they've been just amazing, Larry Page and Sergey, about defining the structure of their company so that they can keep being so inventive about how they push Google forward. And they have had so much expert advice that they can't do that. You can't have a public stock and do what you're doing. And lo and behold, about a month ago, they announced yet a new structure, this Alphabet. I'm actually on the board of Alphabet, not Google. And but anyhow, it's really remarkable how those guys think from first principles. They listen, they seek out all the expert advice, but they really think for themselves. Yeah, so that was sort of advice, and then I wanted to jump to sort of choosing what you want to do and walking away from things that you don't want to do. I think it's okay to do that. And the little quick story I was going to give from windsurfing that has nothing to do with tech, but gives you some insight into how I think about these things. When I came out, well, first the way I got a job in San Francisco, I got a degree in naval architecture from MIT, and all the jobs were in the oil industry in Texas, and I had run a windsurfing regatta out here and knew I wanted to live in the Bay Area. So I asked everybody I knew about, I made this conscious choice. I want to live in the Bay Area. Somebody finally told me about a firm that was designing semi-submersible oil platforms that had a San Francisco office. So I got a name and wrote a letter and didn't hear back from them. And I was a big sailboat racer. I'd put on the bottom of my resume. I had won the women's nationals, and I had that on the bottom of my resume. And and so I finally called this guy up. I said, oh, did you get my resume? And he said, no, we're not. I mean, yes, we did. I'm really sorry I didn't call you back, but we're just not hiring. I was like, oh, okay. And I'm thinking, gosh, am I just going to not be a naval architect? I want to go live in San Francisco. And then he said, I see you're a sailor. And I got I said, oh, do you sail? And he said, you know, he did, and he sailed 505s. And I just totally forgot that he wasn't giving me a job. And I started peppering him with questions about sailing on San Francisco Bay and how you deal with the tides and what kind of wetsuit you wear and all these things. And at the end, he goes, you know what? We are hiring. And I got a job there. And so that's how I got out here. And actually, before that, when I was graduating from University of Vermont in mechanical engineering, I interviewed for all these jobs. And the only job I wanted was with Schlumberger because they sent you off to the offshore oil platforms. But the guy said I couldn't do that because back then in 1976, women weren't allowed on the oil platforms. And so all the jobs were sort of sitting in these big rooms behind a sea of metal desks where you had to lock up your books or somebody would steal them. And I just made up my mind I wasn't going to do that. And so word got around that Diane wasn't taking a job. And the head of my department had me in. Said, what are you going to do? And I said, well, I think I'm going to go sailing. I think I'm just going to race my boat. And he said, yeah, you really like sailing. He goes, I'll tell you what. I think you should design sailboats. You could design sailboats and still sail, and you could get a degree in naval architecture, and you could come back to Vermont and run the local shipyard, which he knew I kept my boats at the shipyard and was very fond of the shipyard. And he said, you should go to MIT and get a degree in naval architecture. And I was like, really? I didn't know naval architecture was something you could study. And he helped me get into MIT. And that's, you know, how I did that because I wasn't willing to take one of these jobs. So I finished at Cal and with my master's and took a little sojourn. It's not very relevant to this talk, but it's sort of fun. I went off to Saipan and spent 3 months excavating a Spanish galleon, and we found a lot of gold. People accuse me of being a gold digger. I've never tried to make money, but anyhow. So, but I came back and I worked I entered the tech industry, and I've been in the tech industry ever since. And I was at Sybase, and they had this incredible woman running engineering, and she was fighting for symmetric multiprocessing, which they didn't think they needed to do. They were wrong. Sybase is no more because of that, basically. But anyhow, they fired her. And I came in one morning, and I had a note from her call me, because she had been letting me do a lot of special projects, and she wanted to run software at Tandem, and so I left the company and went to Tandem with her because I didn't want to hang around if they, you know, as from my standpoint, the best person in the company had been fired. And then Tandem ended up being a little stick in the mud of a company. They wouldn't move to open systems. I love a quote I got while I was complaining about this. David Sheridan's a professor at Stanford, and he was a windsurfing buddy of mine. I was saying, this company, they won't, you know, they have this proprietary system. It's very lucrative, but they've got to move to open systems because you can get all, you know, a lot more software to run on it, and they have hardware, and they need that. And he said, yeah, it's like, you know, they're riding this big, fat, cozy elephant, and it's headed right towards the cliff, and there's this scrawny little donkey going the other way, and they won't jump off. They'd rather ride the elephant off the cliff. And I've always remembered that little story when I'm making a decision. Is it time to change? But anyhow, so I left Tandem, and I looked, and I was really interested in databases, and I looked around, and at the time, SGI had a really incredible machine for doing graphics that I knew would run databases really quickly. So I asked them if they would hire me to turn their graphics machine into a database machine, and they did. And so I worked there for a little while, and then started my career in startups. SGI kind of imploded, and Netscape started. A lot of startups, the internet happened, and everybody left and started companies. And I was doing a project, interactive television, for SGI with AOL, which was a big force at the time under Steve Case. And we launched the precursor to the internet, which was we could stream videos over cable modems, and we could order pizza over cable modems. It was pretty cool stuff back in 1992. And but anyhow, I left because I was looking for lower bandwidth video to stream because the internet had such low bandwidth at the time, and I found it through a friend at Stanford, and then we decided to start a company to do streaming video, so I left SGI. But 1993-94 was a little bit too early to be doing streaming video over the internet. It was a kind of a postage-sized video. We were lucky. Microsoft bought the company for $75 million after a year, so it wasn't so bad. But it was, again, it was something I was interested in. It was something I wanted to do. And then my last example on doing what you want to do, after I left VMware, I thought, well, maybe I should be an investor. I should invest in companies. And I didn't really know how to do it or what I was doing. And I had this idea that I wanted to support women. But I didn't know how to do it. So a lot of women were coming to me and wanting money, and I was giving it to them. But none of what they were doing was infrastructure, which is really what I understood. And I pretty much lost my shirt on all those investments. And so then I decided, well, maybe I should start a company. And this company I was going to start needed a way to build 3D graphics easily. And so I looked around for a tool to do 3D graphics in a portable way, and I found this little tiny company in Denmark. They had 13 people. It was called Unity. And I wrote them and asked to meet the CEO, and he said, yeah, he'd meet me. And then I decided, oh, it's too early. I'm not ready to do another company. And I backed out of it. But he came to the US and looked me up about 3 months later. And he was a really neat guy. And he was looking for money. And so I had already scoped him out as having the best tool for building 3D graphic stuff. It was gamers use it. And I said, well, okay, I'll invest in you. I think you've got a good thing. And I took him around to the VCs. Well, so that is one of my best investments ever. I don't know how many people are familiar with Unity, but it's a big tool out there today. They make, they have, they're still private, so they don't announce their huge revenues, but they're doing really well. But the message is follow your interests. Okay, and then this is all blending together a little bit, but the third one was this bit about finding a way to navigate to your goal. Things will change on you, but you can, if you know where you're going, something's gonna break, and you're gonna find a way to get there, almost every time. That's what I find. I just don't worry about it. We're gonna find a way. And one of my, I have a few good stories about VMware and doing that. The first was when we finally decided to raise sort of a major outside round and not just our angel investors. We decided, okay, the VCs really wanted to give us money. And I was thinking, gee, I'm a little worried about these VCs. I don't really trust them. And maybe we should also pursue another route with hardware vendors. And so I was doing that, and I was going forward with the VCs. And this was in 2000. And in April 2000, it was the dot-com bubble, and the bubble burst. And the VCs that had given us a term sheet and were ready to close suddenly said, oh, we're going to have your valuation. Did you see the bubble burst? You're worth half as much. And I said, no, we know what we're worth. And I already could have made it higher than I made it. So we're not going to take your money. And I swapped over and I had lined up a parallel, a backup plan with these hardware vendors. And I closed the round the next day with the hardware vendors. And then another thing is when I wanted a board and a board of directors, and I wanted to get someone with a lot of experience doing deals. And when I had been at the streaming video company, I had met a big guy at a major recruiting firm, Heidrick & Struggles. So I called him up and I said, could you help me find a board? And he said, well, what are you doing? And I told him, and he said, well, I guess I could help you. It's going to be expensive. And I said, well, okay, and I gave him a list of the people I wanted, and he said, well, you could never get those people. You're going to have to set your sights a lot lower. And I thought, well, I'm going to pay you a lot of money, and I'm not even going to get who I want. So I said, okay, bye. And I was like, how am I going to get my board? And so I decided what I would do. I wanted the head of Wilson Sonsini. I wanted Larry Sonsini because at the time he was the most powerful tech lawyer in the Valley, and he had seen every deal that had ever happened. And we were a company, trying to go in between two monopolies, Intel and Microsoft. I thought it would be important to have a really good deal person. And we were trying to partner with all the big hardware vendors, IBM and Compaq and HP and Dell. And so I wrote him a letter, and I asked someone to introduce me to him, a lawyer I knew. And I was actually using Wilson Sonsini as my law firm, and I said, if I don't get a meeting with him, I'm going to leave the law firm. So I got my meeting with him, and I went in, and his desk was completely clean. Very few people have such a clean desk, except the documents I had sent him about VMware and what was going on at VMware. And very straight, perfectly aligned. And he said, well, can I help you? And I said, yeah, I'd like you to join my board. I wanted to wait and see him, but I immediately had this intuition that he was a great person. And I said, I want you to join my board. And he said, well, I'm really busy getting off boards. I said, okay, well, he said, but go ahead, sit down, let me hear about your company. So I decided to tell him about the negotiations that we had going on with Intel, which were pretty rough negotiations. It's hard when you're a tiny company with 10 million in revenue, to negotiate against a monopolist. And he got really mad. He said, well, if David Noyce, who was the founder of Intel, he said, if David Noyce was still alive, he would not be this way. This isn't how Intel should be operating. And we talked to him about it and what we could do and everything. And then it got pretty late. It was a Friday night, and we said goodbye and went home. And Monday morning, I came in, and I came in at 7 in the morning, and there was a message on my machine that had been left there at 6 a.m. And it was from Larry Sonsini, and he said, I'm inclined to join your board. And I called him up. I said, what does inclined mean? And he joined the board, and he was just invaluable. He was incredible. And it was so open-minded of him to listen to me and to do that, because he didn't know me from a hole in the wall. So, people often say, how do you get a board member? And I think the way you get a great board member is you show them that what you're doing really needs their expertise, and so that they're going to actually be able to be, people like to be valuable, they're going, you know, and he knew he would be valuable to us, and he was. I think I'm going to have to skip some of these stories. I'm just going to tell one more about VMware. We were trying to go to market with the hardware vendors so we wouldn't have to build up as big a sales force. And we were partnering with IBM, and we finally, it was the first time they were ever going to resell software with their hardware, and we were signing the documents, the lawyers were reviewing them, and we had a Linux kernel that we used to bootstrap our system, and it had a GNU public license, and the lawyers said, we can't sign this deal because we're worried, we don't understand, nobody's tested the GNU public license. If we sign this, we might have to open source all of IBM's software across the whole corporation. We cannot resell your software. Well, this was pretty bad news, but you know, we thought, rather than just give up and say, oh, what bad luck, this is terrible, we started thinking, you know, and we had this idea. We said, we wonder if their resellers could resell us, as long as it's not their salespeople. So we came back and said, well, could you ask the lawyers if their resellers could sell us, if there's that level of indirection? And they said yes. Well, that was the biggest break VMware had. It made us just take off our whole server business, because the next thing that happened was they, 2 months later, were having their worldwide elite reseller conference at their conference center in upstate New York, and they let me come give the keynote and do training, bring my people and do training. And they liked us because our software created a need to buy more hardware and higher end hardware. So they were making more money than we were if you sold us. So it was a good situation. But anyhow, they launched us with their IBM Global Exact Partner Network. And overnight, we had the most sophisticated hardware sellers all over the world selling our product. So this bad thing that happened with the GNU public license actually turned out to be the thing that almost made the company. So it's a really incredible story. I had just some thoughts on what to look for if you're looking for an internship or working, but I'm going to skip it. You can ask me in questions if you'd like. Anyhow, just to review what I'm kind of saying, which is, you know, be proactive, decide what you want, and after you've decided what you want, look at what your opportunities are. Take people's input, but remember you're the world expert in what you're thinking about. You've probably thought more about it than anybody else. And it's a process of navigating and course correcting to get to where you want to go, and just be tenacious about it. And then because I'm going to see a big telescope with a friend of mine in Chile in February, I've been reading a lot of astrophysics. And so I wanted to close with this comment that, you know, we're living this incredible time. You know, we know sort of how the universe began almost. And we know that in tens of billions of years, there's either going to be a big chill or a big rip. And the universe is going to be gone. And we're here for an instant, so make the most of it.
Thank you very much. So we're going to go ahead and take questions, and we'll try go on this side first and then go on the other side. But what it would be great is if you could state your name, just first name is fine, or what you're called, and your area of major, what school you're coming from would be fantastic. Yes, and use the microphone because we want to capture the questions. I know you all have also submitted a list of questions, and I can pull from there, but would love to get some from the class right now. Yes? All right. Well, then I will start to pull from there.
So, did you?
Oh.
Yeah.
Oh. You really have to raise that hand. I won't see it.
Okay. Why was it necessary to actually negotiate with Intel? Because I thought
negotiate what?
to negotiate with Intel? Because I thought that VMware would run without any modifications to the Intel architecture.
Yeah, we did run with no modifications. There were a lot of issues. One, we were finding some very bad bugs that other people weren't finding that they needed to fix. And because our software did different things. There were some things that they could do to their chipsets going forward that would make virtualization run a lot better. And we ended up having to work with AMD in order to get Intel to do these things. They told us they wanted to invest in us. And we said, OK, we'll take an investment. And then the term sheet arrived, and it said we had to give them all our IP, and if anyone tried to buy us, they had right of first refusal. And that was what really got Larry Sonsini. When I told him that, he said, that is just really heavy-handed. I could go on and on. But they ended up working with us. And there's a lot of very, very good people at Intel. It was just, we weren't good for them. I mean, we basically commoditized the chipsets, right? And Andy Grove's famous quote is, "He who gets commoditized last wins." And here we were in this position where we were kind of commoditizing their chipsets. So it was totally understandable. They're not a bad company. In fact, I hear they're really good for women. Someone was just telling me today. Yeah.
Question way up here, but there was one question that had come up from a couple of people, and it would be great if you could answer that. And that's just, if you've said this a little bit as you were talking, but if you could go back and talk to your college self about what you did as a major or some other things, what would you have done differently or told yourself to do differently? Or if not, keep on doing. I think you talked about that a little bit, but what would you have possibly told yourself to do differently?
Well, I think knowing what I know now, I doubt there's much chance I would have taken my advice, but because I have a daughter who doesn't listen to me. But anyhow, what I would have done was work harder, and I think it's really good to be broad when you're studying, but I think it's very good to go super deep and narrow on at least one thing. And to put a fine point on that, there's a physics professor, Dave Pritchard, I was talking to at MIT. And I guess he's touched 3 or 4 through advising Nobel laureates. He's emeritus. And I'm like, really, what is your secret? And he said, I give them a very narrow problem, and I make them go very, very deep on it. So that's probably the most profound advice, is to find something that you can just really learn well in addition to your breadth.
So I'm curious, it kind of goes with one of the questions from Ali, I think. Ali's here somewhere from the College of Letters and Science. But having gone through that, and now as a board member, are there things that you learn or do as a board member now in looking at companies and who's running the companies that you do a little differently based on that experience?
Well, I do think I learned a lot about how to do an acquisition and make it successful. I mean, we were unbelievably successful in the way we handled ourselves, and it's a good it was a good model for the unique kind of business overlap we had. So I do advise on that. I think I'm much better at kind of getting along, getting people to feel good about seeing things my way without being mad at me. I think I learned a lot about that. I think I was a little confrontational, and after you've been on a boards for a while, you never want to be confrontational, and you always want to help. You're there to make the company successful. So you just ask questions and support people. And I wish they would have done that with me, but yeah, I think I've learned that.
Well, hello. Thank you so much for your presentation. My name is Nicolas Raga. I'm from Venezuela, and I'm doing mechanical engineering here at Berkeley. And I saw throughout your stories that you were able to bridge that gap between computer science and being able to do business. You did both. You did both the technology and the business aspect and look for VCs and the sort. How were you able to do that, to do both the technical aspect and the business aspect, and put yourself in a position to take advantage of luck?
I'm not sure. I did actually at one point think about going to business school, but I was like, nah, there's too much else to do. But I did growing up. I was a fanatical sort of risk and monopoly player. And it really teaches you to negotiate. And I think that was really helpful. I raced sailboats. I was pretty competitive. So I think I kind of had this genetic thing to do the sorts of things you have to do to build a business. Maybe. I don't know. I got lucky. We had a really good product. I will say, I mean, it was just a brilliant idea, and it was just a fabulous product. Yeah.
Hello.
Yeah.
I'm Tyler. I'm in material science and engineering here at Berkeley. And my question, I was wondering if, like, throughout your long career as, I don't know, CEO, founder, board member, all these things, if you've ever gone through a major shift in the company, like a sort of pivot, and how your kind of experiences helped you deal with that?
Well, at VMware, the closest thing where that happened was we got our server product out, and it really wasn't taking off. It was the bubble, and there was no, people were just buying computers. Like there was no, Sun Microsystems was making tons of money because all the startups were just buying tons of computers that they didn't even need. And so our software wasn't, people were like, that would just slow me down to use your software. And so we thought maybe we weren't really sure how to get people to want to use our software, and we thought we'd be a really safe way to run any kind of software at the edge of the network. So we were going out to people like Akamai and at the time Exodus, they're now out of business, that were kind of providing edge of the network services. And we were saying, why don't you have people put their software in our virtual machines, and you won't have to worry about bad things happening because it'll be contained in this virtual machine. And we knew some of the people. Actually, one of the top people at Akamai had been a grad student with us at Berkeley, and we were talking. We thought Peter Danzig, we could do this, but they just were like too busy to deal with it, and then we noticed that some of the banks and pharmaceuticals were playing around with using us for server consolidation, as a way to manage, their software so they didn't have this proliferation of machines. And so we thought, well, these guys can pay for their software. These are real businesses. So we went and we really spent a bunch of time with that. And then it was really funny. A company, I forget the name of the company in the Midwest, declared bankruptcy. And they just became a huge customer of ours because they couldn't buy any more machines. And that became the joke. Let's go look for the bankrupt companies. And it was true. Companies in distress couldn't buy more machines, so they needed, and it turned out you could run what you would normally run on 10 machines, you could run on 1 if you had our software. So we basically pivoted from thinking we were going to be this edge of the network was going to be our end. We basically pivoted to server consolidation. And so then we embraced that. We built a tool to go out on the network and find out the utilization of all your machines and let you know how, how much surplus capacity you already had. And then we also built another tool, P2V, to take what was on your physical machine and plop it in a virtual machine by just sort of pushing a button. And so that was sort of a pivot that worked out. You know, that's when we started growing our sales. Yeah.
So I think we have about 3 more questions. I think it's 1, 2, and back at the top. And Diane, I'm going to just turn the screen on because we have an attendance as we're finishing up the questions. So do you want to?
Hi, I'm Joanne, and I'm a political economy major. I wanted to ask how your experience was both in the business and tech fields as a woman, and how your experiences were with your interactions, and how you think people treated you and things like that.
Yeah, I was having some interesting conversations about that today. I mean, I'm quite sure that it was pretty striking, the difference between how I was treated on the East Coast and the West Coast. It was better on the West Coast. And, but I mean, you have to understand, I grew up in this world, I worked in the oil industry where they wouldn't even let me on the oil rig. And so I was pretty numb to people mistreating me because I was a woman. And which I think you guys thankfully expect more and should, and it's your right, and the world needs you. And so I just kind of tuned it all out, but if I think deeply about it, I can remember lots of anecdotes, like the CEO of my East Coast company saying, my great aunt in New York City could run your company. I'm like, really? Or them having a consultant that was supposed to help me be my coach. And what did she want to do? She wanted to take me clothes shopping and to the manicurist. And I'm like, what's this about? So, these things happen, but at the end of the day, I was, able to do my job, and I used it to my advantage where I could, because it was so helpful having a technical background, because I could always, a lot of the executives like at IBM and Intel are very technical, and I could hold my own with them. And they didn't expect it, and people would take meetings with me. They're like curious, what is this woman running this company? In the tech, in this technical area. And then I would come in and I could talk technology with them. And they'd, it would surprise them and it would work to my advantage. But I think people now know that women can talk about technology and know what they're talking about and have good ideas. Yeah.
Thank you.
2 more questions. And then Diane, I think we'll be here maybe for 10 more minutes afterwards, if that's all right with you.
Yeah.
Hi, it's really nice to meet you. My name is Ruta, and I'm a computer science major here at Berkeley.
Where are you? Can you wave your
hand?
Right here in front of you. There, sorry.
I wanted to ask, you've had so much success with so many different companies in different areas, and they say that ideas are a dime a dozen, so how do you decide which ones are the good ones?
Well, another way of looking at that, one thing is when you have an idea, I think you need to think of it in stages. Initially you got to build something tiny, right? Because you just have a few people. But you have to see where it can go, where it can become really big. And you have to be very good at always aligning your decisions to get you to the big thing along the way. But so does your idea have the ability to become a big thing? And then they're a dime a dozen. You can have a lot of ideas that could become big things, and that's where navigation comes in. I actually believe, this world just has infinite possibilities. And basically, if you have a good idea, it's all in the execution. And you just start executing and navigating your way there. And you can make it successful. It's tenacity and execution.
I know there's a question way back there, and I'm not going to be able to get up there quickly, so way at the back at the end.
Yeah, my name.
But you do want to ask people and see if they can show you why it's maybe not a good idea, and listen to them, you know. But if they're wrong, you know, if they don't, yeah.
Do you mind standing up?
My name is Michael. I'm a computer science and economics here. My question is, since you have a technical background, when did you decide it was enough for you to do the actual technical work? And so, like, phase yourself out to be more like playing a business role in the company, or did you maintain a very technical role throughout the entire course at VMware?
No, so I had done this other startup, this streaming video startup, and I went in there, I was going to run engineering, but I was the only one in the whole company that had ever even worked in industry. Everybody else was from Stanford Graduate School or a professor from Stanford. So I became the business leader because I'd worked in industry. And I didn't plan to be the CEO. They made me the CEO. I said, well, okay, I'll be it temporarily till we find one. And we couldn't convince a good person to come and be the CEO, so I was sort of the default CEO. And so then when we decided, I went and helped another startup. And there I was around the technology, but it was really organizing the company and making sure they were executing on the technical front, but also a market fit. It was a favor for a VC, and they ended up doing, you know, that was a good thing. It was very successful. So then, but I left that. They wanted me to, you know, I could have stuck with that and run it, but I wanted to, I could see the potential of this virtualization idea was my husband's at Stanford, and I really thought it should get brought to market. So I just told him, look, I've now done 2 startups. I can help you get this to market. Why don't we do this? And my plan, you know, because I was pregnant with my second kid, my plan was to get it off the ground and bring in a CEO. But there was a lot to do on the business side, and it was really fun, and it was working pretty well. You know, I brought my baby to work with me for 6 months, and then stopped, you know, when she got a little noisier. But yeah, so at VMware, I mean, I always stayed involved in the product. I was always part of product reviews, but we had a world-class technical team I was way outclassed by, and I did the business side, and then just product reviews for making sure it was a real product and going to fit in the market. But I had to be technical to understand what the product was and how it worked, but I wasn't designing product.
I do have just one last question.
Yeah.
You just don't stop. You are still looking at new companies. And I am wondering, what attribute is it that you think you have that just keeps you going?
Yeah, I'm an energetic person. My sales guy at VMware made fun of me for that. He called me what's that little ever bunny? So you know, we'd fly somewhere, and I'd be like doing stuff the whole flight, and everybody else is watching movies. And it didn't bother me but I didn't want to. But I don't know. I think I'm very curious about things. I don't know.
Thank you for sharing your curiosity and being so open about everything. So thank you.